yesterday I started at about 5 and ended at midnight here. So. Possibly beyond, definitely till.
Did you, just so you folks know, just a little bit after 2 o'clock or so.
Do you want me to start off with this?
Mr. Crummel's in charge.
All right. I'm laid back, whatever the best.
Well, we go around the table and let the panel introduce themselves. Then we'll start off and have you do a little introduction and Judy's start off the first question.
Great.
Jim Sharon, Public News, Lima News.
Judy Jeffrey, Information Specialist of the Allen County Council on Aging.
Oh, great.
Jared Walsh, CPA.
Thanks, Ben.
Patty Conner, President of Brain Training Manufacturing, based here in Lima.
Lynn Carpenter, Fund Memorial System.
I'm Mike Nicely, this is going to be a point of Tech Union, also the President of Lima Building Trades Council.
Great.
Jim Stanford, owner of Gilbert.
Tim Stolly, co-owner of Stolly Insurance here in Lima. We have three other locations in two different counties.
Jay Begg, I'm Commissioner-elect for Allen County and farmer and former fair managers.
Perfect. Thanks for being here.
David Trinko, new media editor for the Lima News.
Heather Rutz, reporter with the Lima News.
Jim Crummell, the editor. Judy, the first question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll take a few minutes. I'm born and raised in the state of Ohio. 35 years old. My wife and I live about 2 minutes from where we grew up, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to spend the rest of our life in the state of Ohio. And my thrust into public service was twofold. One, I looked around and saw a lot of my friends and kids and grandkids of our state leaving Ohio. Essentially, we were an exporter of kids and grandkids, and it was something that concerned me. And I thought the main reason was because of jobs here in our state, and that was one of my motivations for getting into public service. Secondly, I was inspired by my grandparents. One was a U.S. Army Air Corps veteran, and the other was liberated by Allied troops, and they inspired me to join the Marine Corps and serve my country in that respect, and also serve my community and state in public service as well. Was a city councilman for 3 years. I dealt with a lot of the same municipal issues that folks in Lima and throughout Allen County deal with local governmental entities. And then was in the state legislature for 4 years. The district I represented was an interesting one. It was 2-to-1 Democrat to Republican. At the congressional level, my district was represented in part by Dennis Kucinich. So as a Republican, I was able to get elected in a 2-to-1 Democrat to Republican area with the help of thousands of Democrats voting for me and so many others putting signs in their front yard and making donations. And I believe one of the main problems we've had in Columbus, and definitely one of the main problems in Washington, is that too many leaders care more about the DWR next to their name than they do about doing the right thing. Coming from an area that's 2-to-1 Democrat to Republican, I learned firsthand the importance of rising above partisan politics and working across party lines to move the government forward economically. I served that role as a legislator for 4 years, and I'm leading the state treasurer's office in that respect as well. I'm leaving you with a one-pager on one of our accomplishments from the treasurer's office. I'm not going to go through them all right now. You can read them at your leisure, but just to give you a quick overview of the success and performance in the state treasurer's office. When I came in there, it was right in the wake of the U.S. credit rating being downgraded for the first time in American history, and 14 state and local government investment funds had just been downgraded throughout America. In that environment, which included economic chaos in Europe as well, we've earned the highest rating we can earn, a AAA rating on the multi-billion-dollar investment fund in Manage. We've earned the highest rating on the bonds on Manage. For the first time in almost a decade, we earned an upgrade in the Ohio Enterprise Bond Fund. Our portfolio is up over $2 billion since the day I took office. We've navigated the European sovereign debt crisis not only without a loss, but actually with a yield on behalf of taxpayers. And on top of that, we voluntarily cut our budget 2 years in a row. And of the budget that I inherited from my predecessor, we voluntarily cut that as well. gave $400,000 back to the general government fund, back to the taxpayers, and said, listen, even though this money is already allocated to me, we're going to give it back and do more with less. And we believe that story, both the story of bipartisanship in the legislature and the story of fiscal performance in the state treasurer's office, contrasts in a very stark fashion with the unfortunate mess in Washington, where unfortunately they racked up a $16 trillion debt that exceeds our entire American economy. They haven't passed a budget in over 3 years. And on top of that, I believe Washington is riddled with partisanship and partisan bickering. We need leaders there who are going to work across party lines to improve the economic environment and essentially limit the scope, size, and intrusion of government into your businesses.
I believe that overregulation and overtaxation are two major problems. I believe that overregulation and overtaxation are
I served in the Marine Corps, did a couple tours in Iraq. Does not mean that I love my country any more than the U.S.'s country. We just have a different vision for where we want to take it. And third observation, he's been running for political office since Richard Nixon was president. I've been in Washington for 2 decades. Was named the most liberal senator in the United States of America, to the left of Bernie Sanders from Vermont, who's a self-avowed socialist. This was not from a conservative group, this was from a nonpartisan magazine. It's the same magazine that rates Jim Jordan as one of the most conservative congressmen in America, rates Sherrod Brown as the most liberal senator in the United States of America. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce gave him the lowest rating in the entire country when it comes to friendliness to business. I come from a family that's a good mix of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And I'm libertarian as well. And so when we're at our family dinner table and family picnics, what have you, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, vegetarians, what have you, no one in my family, none of my neighbors, none of my friends, even the ones who are Democrats, think that we live in the most liberal state in the nation. But we have representing us someone who is an extremist, who in fact was named because of his voting record, the most liberal senator in America. And I would submit to you that we need leaders in Washington who have pragmatism, who are willing to work across party lines, who are willing to rise above partisan politics, and who are not the most liberal senators in the country, and who actually understand the importance of friendliness to business, not frustrating as antagonistic to business. And so while Sherrod is a nice person and he loves his country, unfortunately over the past 6 years, he's failed as a United States Senator, and I believe I've earned a chance to go there and try to do a better job representing our state. That's a quick and dirty on me and debating conversation he and I are having throughout the state. I'd be glad to open up to any question you'd like to shoot my way on any public policy.
I'm going to go around the table there.
Beautiful. Judy. I worked with, when I was a state representative, I've worked with our area council on aging very closely, so I know I'm integrally familiar with the issues you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, as you know, we work with most of the people that we work with are moderate and low income people who don't have a lot of money to spare and are struggling to get by. And of course, they all depend on Medicare, which is a good program, and has a well-run presented. So I was wanting to ask you what you think about the future of Medicare. Can it be preserved in the state that will keep the benefits pretty much there and also the affordability?
Sure. I view Medicare through the prism of my family. My grandmother is 83 years old. I believe for my grandmother, her friends in her generation, it is unfair to change Medicare whatsoever. And I believe we need to do everything we can to protect and preserve Medicare for my grandmother and her generation. I also look at it through the prism of my parents. My parents are 59 and 61 respectively, they're baby boomers. I think it is unfair to change Medicare and Social Security for that matter whatsoever for my parents and their generation, and also others who are younger than them who are on the way nearing retirement. But then I think about my niece Hannah. My niece Hannah is 20 months old. It's my sister Rachel, her daughter. If we do nothing, if we maintain the status quo, there will be no Medicare or Social Security for Hannah and any of your kids and grandkids who are now in elementary school or maybe So for my parents and their generation, folks who are even younger and near retirement, it's unfair to change anything. For my grandmother and her generation, it's unfair to change anything. And as a United States Senator, I'll do everything I can to protect, preserve Social Security and Medicare for them. But for my niece Hannah and her friends and her generation, we must do something. I think it's important that we do it in a bipartisan way. And frankly, I think this is one of those issues where Democrats and Republicans can't come together. In talking to some of my friends who are Democrats and leaders on the other side of the aisle, they get it. I think they have a similar sense that I do, that it's unfair to change it on folks who are currently enrolled or on the way there. But for kids and grandkids and younger people, maybe toddlers or elementary school kids, they understand that we need to do something. And I'm confident we can do it in that person way.
So what do we do? You said we should do something for this group, but we should for the younger people.
Well, I think one of the conversations we need to have is about life expectancy and improved healthcare in America. These are good things. I mean, think about how long people are living now. This is something good we should celebrate. Think about the improved healthcare. The healthcare that you're putting out of your organization right now, you're taking care of folks. I imagine the product you're putting out now is even stronger than you were putting out 10 years ago or 15 years ago. That's a good thing. And the same thing at the Cleveland Clinic and the James Cancer Hospital in Columbus and the University of Cincinnati Hospital and so on and so forth. But with improved healthcare comes increased life expectancy. With increased life expectancy comes the importance of applying actuarial science to these programs. And unfortunately, there's been no application of actuarial science, to my knowledge, in many decades. And I think that's step one, is to have an application of actuarial science, as we do in the private sector, to these programs. And while we don't change them for folks who are nearing enrollment in these programs who are already there, for Hannah and your kids and grandkids, we have to take into consideration increased life expectancy and improve healthcare. And you know what? Democrats are talking about that as well, I think, and folks get it. And that can almost solve Social Security. It's a little more complicated on Medicare, but that almost gets us to solve Social Security.
Josh, first, thanks for your service.
Thank you.
You and I are exactly the same age. And sort of following up on Judy's question, I have lots of conversations with my parents and with my clients who are in my parents' generation about these entitlement issues of Social Security specifically. And the reasonable members of that generation realize there's an issue. And primarily, the issue isn't necessarily one of even government malfeasance when it comes to those funds. It's a numbers issue. There's 100 million baby boomers, and there's like 60 million of you and I.
Right.
The numbers just aren't for us that we just won't physically be able to pay enough in to sustain that program. How do you get elected when we're 35? How do you win elections when you're facing such numbers deficits when it comes to the electorate? How can we win?
Well, A, you gotta shoot straight with folks. I think people find honesty and shooting straight refreshing. I can tell that story straight on from my state representative district. I mean, I knocked on approximately 19,679 doors, approximately, when I ran for state representative. And I had a lot of Democrats whose door I knocked and said, I agree with you on this, I disagree with you on this, I agree on this, disagree on this, but I'm going to vote for you because you took the time to look me in the eyeballs and tell me how you stand. So part of it is having the backbone and integrity to stand strong on issues. Second, you need people who are willing to not get reelected. I'm actually a proponent of term limits. I think we should apply 12-year term limits for House members and Senate members. Sherrod Brown actually was a supporter of term limits as well. When he first ran in 1992, he ran on a platform of a 12-year term limit when he first ran for Washington. And then when his 12 years were up, he changed his mind and wrote that pledge and now it's been for 20 years. I believe term limits are important. I also believe that we need to hold folks accountable for not doing their job. So I'm also a strong proponent, along with Senator Voinovich and also Senator Evan Bonnet, who's a former senator from Indiana and actually was a Democrat, of the proposal of no budget, no pay. If folks in Washington aren't going to pass a budget, they shouldn't get paid. It's one of their fundamental duties, and they've gone now over 3 years without passing a budget. And so when I go around and talk about proposals like this, term limits, no budget, no pay, I hear from Democrats, Republicans, and Independents who say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense, there's some common sense in there. When I I talk about school choice, for instance, something I feel very strongly about, I see it more as a local issue and state issue, not as a federal issue. I have a lot of folks say, you know what, I disagree with you on that, but I agree with you on this. Or I talk about oil and gas exploration, and say, well, I agree with you on this and disagree with you on that. But they know where I stand. I'm very strong in my beliefs. And I found that actually standing on principle and standing for something and having the guts to be out there, people find it refreshing. And while they may not agree with me on my stance on the Affordable Health Care Act or on oil and gas exploration or on school choice or on budgetary issues, the fact that I do have a position is refreshing because I think they look in Washington and they see a lot of folks who are waffling and afraid to take positions. And that's not me. I'm not going to be someone there going there to get reelected. I'm going to go there to do a good job and do it under the vein of representing the 11.5 million people. Going this way.
Let's talk about jobs and speech. Great example last year was the Keystone XL pipeline. My business is very sensitive to petroleum costs, shipping, resin costs, things like that. Our current president shut down the expansion of the Keystone XL. Shared roundtable, no. There's been plenty of fact and observation and discovery about the number of jobs it would create. The dependence of foreign oil would decrease substantially. And from just a national security issue, it's a plus. If you're elected, will you also vote no? Or if not, why? And what are some other policies you can pursue or create from a job expansion standpoint instead of a suppression mentality that seems to exist now?
I'm a strong supporter of the Keystone Pipeline, XL Pipeline. I respectfully disagree with Senator Brown and President Obama on the positions they took there. When the president was advocating for the stimulus package, the terminology they used was shovel-ready jobs. And they were advocating for shovel-ready jobs funded with taxpayer money. Think about Keystone. These are tens of thousands of shovel-ready jobs with private sector dollars. It doesn't require any taxpayer money whatsoever. In my mind, that's a no-brainer. I feel very strongly also about the opportunity we have here in the state of Ohio with new jobs under the umbrella of energy exploration. As many of you know, we've been a coal state for a long time. Approximately 86% of Ohio is powered off of coal. We now, though, have this great opportunity also in the Marcellus and the Utica shale. Let me talk about how these energy opportunities impact jobs, not just in eastern Ohio where the shale formations exist, but right here in Allen County throughout west central Ohio. I call oil and gas exploration the win-win-win-win. The first win is new job creation. Right now, there's an economic revolution ongoing in eastern Ohio, where some of the most economically depressed counties in our state are now humming economically because men and women are working in and around the oil and gas industry. That being said, there's many more manufacturing jobs being created in our state as well surrounding this industry. In Youngstown, for the first time in over 50 years, there's a new steel plant going online, B&M Star, coming from France to build a new plant in Youngstown to make pipes, tubes, and fittings for oil and gas exploration. In Lorain County, 100 new jobs from U.S. Steel for oil and gas related productivity. Timken and Canton, $200 million investment into new manufacturing, a lot of which will be related to the oil and gas industry. In North Dakota right now, they have 2.9% unemployment in the Bakken Shale Formation. I read an article that they're paying McDonald's workers $15 an hour with a signing bonus. Think about that for a second. This ain't the NFL. I mean, this is McDonald's. They're giving them a signing bonus. In Western Pennsylvania right now, a friend of mine who's here in Ohio told me a story about a guy who owns a hardware store in Western PA who was about to go out of business a few years ago. Now he's in the verge of owning the entire block. Think about that for a moment. It's happening right now in the state of Ohio. That new job creation related to oil and gas exploration can impact in a positive way Allen County. Let me give you my vision for Allen County with respect to oil and gas exploration related to new jobs. One of the great traditions we have here in Allen County, and frankly up and down I-75, is manufacturing. We have so many family manufacturing companies up and down I-75, and obviously yours range company, but so many others up and down I-75. I visited Sydney Tool and Die. This was a few months ago. They started on a $1,500 loan in the 1950s. They now employ 108 people, and he's toured me around his shop. And I'm asking him, what's this, what's that? He's like, oh, these are new products we're putting out. And I said, what for? He said, the oil and gas industry. That can be Allen County as well. Think about all these family manufacturers throughout Allen County, throughout the Lima area, who are making products maybe for aerospace industry or for home industry or other industries. There's already a trained workforce, there's already an infrastructure, there's already machinery, there's already the ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit there. Why can't they be making products, pipes, tubes, fittings, oil and gas as well? They can. And I believe Allen County can be one of the counties, not in Ohio, but in the United States of America, that can actually be a leader in new manufacturing in this industry. And so the win-win-win is new jobs for our state and our country. The second win is affordable energy. You mentioned it in your question. Bringing down the cost of powering our factories, transporting our goods. I visited a winemaker here in Allen County as well. Obviously, the cost of transportation there impacts their ability to hire people and to move products throughout the country. Bringing down the cost of transporting goods, bringing down the cost of gassing up our own cars, bringing down the cost for senior citizens of keeping their homes in the winter. The third win is our communities and the tax base. Think about all of the school levies we see coming on and all of the income tax levies we see from municipalities. School districts are struggling. Municipalities, local governments are struggling. You see the health and human services levies at the county level. Imagine if we didn't have to do all these levies. Imagine if we had a new revenue source without raising taxes whatsoever. Revenue from oil and gas exploration and new manufacturing related to it that can help fund our schools, take care of our senior citizens, fund our cops and our firefighters. And this is actually an area where conservative Republicans can work hand in glove with folks from the pipe fitters union. Because you know what? Folks from the pipe fitters union are receiving new jobs in Eastern Ohio because of this. And I'd venture to guess, when we get around to this question, I'd venture to guess that pipe fitters are probably one of the main labor organizations that benefits from expanded oil and gas exploration. You saw it out west in the Keystone. The labor organizations were working with a lot of the Republicans on this. Think about that, with all the partisan bickering and infighting in Washington. Think about an issue that actually bring together conservative Republicans and labor organizations. This is a good thing. It's a win-win-win. And that fourth win is national security. We are most safe as a nation when we produce as much energy as possible here in the United States. I do not believe we should be putting boots in the ground all over the world. I actually think it's time to focus our energy, our time, our dollars domestically. I think we should be trimming down and shutting down some of the bases we have in Europe, and I think we should really be doing a top-line review of all the bases we have and the footprint we have throughout the world. Think about it, we can keep our country more safe and secure because of producing energy here. About the unrest in the Middle East, in Libya, killing our ambassador, overrunning our embassy. In Egypt, they overran our embassy, they brought down the United States flag. I read an article that they hoisted a flag that said, Allah is God and Muhammad is the messenger. On the United States Embassy. I believe we're most safe when we produce energy here in the United States. So, but first and foremost, Pat, it's a job creator. And as you can tell, I have a lot of passion for energy. And sure. I mean, energy. Here's the easiest way to say it: energy equals jobs. And whether you're talking about Sherrod Brown opposing Keystone Pipeline or Sherrod Brown opposing oil and gas exploration here in the state of Ohio, at the end of the day, he's not on the wrong side of the issue. He's on the wrong side of history.
I also have a passion about healthcare. Some of the things that are concerning are the automatic spending cuts that are set to go into effect January 1st. Obviously, Ohio hospitals in general are going to be impacted. Ohio hospitals, about $138 million in reduction for us. If you took office, what would you do to work with the other side of the aisle to make sure that they're not arbitrary cuts that won't fall out?
Right. Well, first and foremost, in order to save money for health care, we have to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act. This is one of the areas where Senator Brown and I respectfully and fundamentally disagree. I don't call it Obamacare too often, and frankly, I don't call it the Affordable Health Care Act that often because there's nothing really, in my mind, too affordable about it. I describe it and what I believe it is. For the first time in American history, the federal government taking over health care. And if we do not want the federal government taking over our health care for many reasons. One is what you articulated, that it will be an added burden, not only for healthcare systems, but also for family-owned small businesses throughout Allen County and throughout our country. We also know, as the Supreme Court told us, that it's a new tax on middle-class Ohioans at about the worst time we can apply new taxes on middle-class Ohioans. We also know that it cuts $700 billion for Medicare. As you articulately stated with the demographic reality about baby boomers and the current demographics of senior citizens, now is about the worst time we should be cutting $700+ billion from Medicare. But that's exactly what this legislation does. It steals $700 billion from Medicare to pay for the legislation. It also specifically targets medical device manufacturers. First of all, we shouldn't be specifically targeting for new taxes manufacturers at all. The backbone of our country. If we're going to stay strong as a country, we have to make things. We have to make goods here and export them throughout the world. Why would we be targeting with new taxes any manufacturers, let alone medical device manufacturers that are making products that actually save people's lives? Because you know what happens when you add that 3.5% tax on medical devices, that's going to get passed on to you in your healthcare system. When you go to buy a new MRI machine, you go to buy sterilization equipment, and you're going to have to pass that on to the consumer. It makes Medicare more expensive, and it makes anyone who's paying for healthcare more expensive. I believe one of the main issues we have to discuss is common sense tort law. Whether I like it or not, when I'm around my family, we have a big family. Oftentimes on Saturday nights we have these dinners where it's a lot of my family together. We have 5 doctors in my family, and they're all in their 30s and 40s. Young, aggressive, intelligent physicians. One of my cousins, endocrinologist, one's a psychiatrist, one's an ENT, one's a pediatrician, and one's an ophthalmologist. They're all in their 30s and 40s. And what I hear from them very often is that they and their peers in medicine feel that they're oftentimes forced to practice defensive medicine. They are so concerned about being sued that they're almost afraid to rely on their instincts and their training. It's a serious problem. Listen, if someone's wronged on the operating table, if someone's wronged in the emergency room, if a doctor screws up, or a nurse screws up, or this system screws up, they should be able to pursue financial justice in the court. At the same time, it shouldn't be made into an industry. Junk lawsuits should not be made into an industry. It's one of the main reasons why healthcare has become so expensive. It's one of the main reasons why you have physicians, especially in the emergency room, as you probably know, being forced to practice defensive medicine. I also believe we should allow for purchase and sale of insurance across state lines. Why do we build these artificial barriers at state lines? Open up the markets. We all know how the free market works. When you open up those markets, when you allow citizens to vote with their feet and shop on their own, they'll find the best products for themselves, for their families. It'll bring costs down, quality of access. So those are some of my ideas. But to your question, I think it's important to do it in a bipartisan way. And I believe there will be leaders on both sides of the aisle who are willing to rise above partisan politics to work on healthcare reform. I do believe healthcare in a lot of ways is broken in this country, but I think a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about, in addition to expanded access to health savings accounts, are the way to go, and less of the government taking over. You think about the government's track record of running businesses, Fannie and Freddie, Amtrak, Postal Service, $5 billion in the red. But past being prologue, I don't think we want the federal government right now.
Can you talk about broken systems? Reminds me of the sustainable growth reform for Medicare, 30% reduction for physicians. How do you feel about that?
Right. Well, the SGR issue is an important issue. Obviously, in Washington, Democrats and Republicans have been kicking the can down the road for a long time, and it's something I talk a lot about with my physician friends, and that'll be a priority issue I think for us to deal with when we first get there. I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the SGR issue, but it's an issue that has essentially been plugged temporarily year after year after year. And we're talking to my friends at the Ohio State Medical Association, other physicians, both Democrats and Republicans. I think they're looking for a more permanent fix rather than a perpetual temporary maintenance. So I think we need to have a conversation of some type of solution, long-term solution. I mean, this temporary kicking the can down the road every 1 year, every 2 years, it places uncertainty in the marketplace, and it makes it difficult for you as a healthcare system to plan, and it also makes it difficult for physicians to plan. While we're blessed to have strong healthcare systems like the one we represent, we also have a lot of physician-owned practices and physician-owned hospitals and medical entrepreneurs. And we all know, and any of the entrepreneurs in the room know this, that uncertainty in any marketplace makes it difficult to plan. And difficulty in planning means capital sitting on the sidelines.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I think Lynn's original question was about sequestration, and I didn't hear an answer to that. You were talking about the $138 million. That was in reference to the fiscal cliff issue that's coming, and I didn't hear you address that.
Sure, I can talk about sequestration with respect to healthcare. It's a little difficult to talk about it in respect to healthcare without talking about it in respect to defense and other issues. So if I have the liberty to sort of talk about sequestration in general, it's difficult to divorce the healthcare component to the other components. This is where I differ with a lot of Republicans. A lot of Republicans will argue that defense spending should be off the table. We can't touch defense spending as well at all. I believe the Marine Corps, where I serve, is one of the most efficient organizations I've ever seen. That being said, there is waste in the defense department, and we need to do a top-bottom review of our defense department in order to make knowledge accessible to fund healthcare long-term and fund medical and social security, Medicare and social security. Now, let me start with something I mentioned earlier briefly and go over more in detail. We are not fighting the Nazis anymore. We are not fighting the Cold War anymore. It does not make sense to me that we have the footprint we currently have in Germany, in Italy, and other parts of Europe. Some of you may be familiar with the BRAC process, the base realignment and closure process. Approximately every 5 years in Washington, they do a top-down review of all the bases we have here domestically and ask the question, what should stay open? What should be closed? What needs to be trimmed down? What should be expanded? We need to do that same thing in an aggressive fashion for our bases outside of the United States. It's time to bring home our young men and women. We can't bring them all home, but we need to, I believe, bring more home and focus these dollars here domestically on driving the economy here in the United States and creating a better economic environment for job creation, and also in protecting healthcare and also Medicare long into the future. We also can't talk about sequestration and can't talk about saving Medicare and sustaining health care without talking about foreign aid. And this is where I'm going to take on Republicans as well in Washington. Every Democrat and every Republican who voted a few months ago to give $1 billion of our tax money to Pakistan, right in the wake of Pakistan convicting for treason the guy who helped us find Osama bin Laden, who was fiscally irresponsible and morally wrong. Sherrod Brown was one of the people on the Senate Appropriations Committee who voted for it. But listen, there's Democrats and Republicans who are guilty of this. Our foreign aid program is broken and ridiculous. They're sending foreign aid, our hard-earned tax money, to Egypt, who elected their head of state a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is not a governmental organization. This is a terrorist organization. We should not be giving as welfare our hard-earned tax dollars to countries like that. We should not be giving as welfare our hard-earned tax dollars to countries that harbor terrorists. We should not be giving as welfare our hard-earned tax dollars to countries that vote against us 75% of the time at the United Nations. And I believe over many decades and many generations, Democrats and Republicans have been at fault for willy-nilly and blindly giving our tax dollars away to these countries. I also believe that the Wall Street bank bailout was dead wrong and misguided. I think every Republican, every Democrat who voted to take our tax dollars and give them to Wall Street banks back a few years ago was dead wrong. For all these small businesses sitting around the room, and even small businesses you represent in your accounting firm, how many of them in 2008, 2009 who were struggling here in Allen County got a call from the federal government in Washington, or got a call from Wall Street and said, we're here to bail you out? Zero. But it was okay to take the tax dollars of small businesses here in Allen County and give them away to bail out Wall Street banks. So those are some of my ideas. No more bailing out Wall Street banks. No more giving as welfare our hard-earned tax dollars to foreign countries that harbor terrorists. And really do a hard look at our Defense Department and ask how everything we're doing, every defense dollar is being spent, how does it contribute to the national security of our country? We should be protecting missions like the Lima tank. And I applaud Democrats and Republicans, folks on both sides of the aisle, for doing that. We need to do everything we can to protect the Lima tank plant. We should do everything we can to protect Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. These are assets for our national security. These are assets for economic growth here in the state of Ohio. But in order to do that, and avoid them being on the chopping block for sequestration, we need to make cuts in other parts of our federal government. Please.
Josh, just real quick, I need to give you some insight and help on the Keystone, and probably in this room, I'm probably
And I should
on this. No,
I should applaud your union brethren.
Oh, no, that's fine. We supported
the
that.
The AFL-CIO, and I know the pipe fitters. You guys should be applauded for all your support.
There was 3 legs to the Keystone. You have the northern leg, which was approved by the State Department. The southern leg, which is where the oil goes to, which is approved. It was the middle leg, which the governor of Nebraska held up. So you got to understand that. Also, there was no guarantees that the crude that would come down there would be staying in the United States as a domestic issue.
Right.
It was still on the open market for profit all over the world. So when you're worried about transportation things, make sure you take all that. But to the point, I want to be consistent with my question yesterday to Senator Brown. You know, you talk about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce gave him his lowest rating, you know, for jobs. However, in Ohio and in this area, we've been a direct recipient of the auto rescue plan. It's not a bailout, it was a loan. A bailout is when you don't give any money back. But it actually, in this area, we, $25 million just for our local Ford plant. It stabilized, saved jobs. Also, you talked about, you know, the tank plant. You know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce gives him a low rating, but he supported both of these initiatives. But more so to the auto industry, with over 850,000 jobs tied in the state of Ohio to the auto industry, and as numerous executives from Toyota and Honda supporting the auto rescue plan, you called Senator Brown's vote on this un-American. Why did you oppose it?
Well, to begin with, I need to correct the premise of your question, because there are many false statements you made in your question. First of all, that piece of that bailout is a bailout. The taxpayers have not gotten paid back, and the way the GM stock is traveling, the taxpayers are not going to get paid back in a very long time or ever. So I'm going to correct the premise of your question. The premise of your question is incorrect. Secondly, as you know full well, Ford did not receive or advocate for bailout dollars. Third, I believe that it's completely unfair to strip these Delphi employees of their pensions. I don't understand how, with a straight face, you, Senator Brown, and others think it's okay to go and split American citizens, split them in the middle-class citizens, and say, if you belong to a union, you can keep your pension, but if you don't belong to a union, you lose your pension? Think about that. Think about that. We have, what, 10 people sitting around this table here. Imagine if you all, let's say you all work for the same company, and the federal government comes in and says, everyone, you're all middle class, okay? The salaried employees and the blue-collar union laborers, they're all middle class, okay? These aren't folks getting 7-figure executive salaries, they're all middle class. Imagine the federal government walks into this room, you guys all work for, let's say you all work for Range Company, all right? Federal government comes in and says, everyone on this side of the table, you belong to a union. We're going to allow you to keep your pension. You guys are operating machines, working on the floor. Now you answer the phones, your engineers, your secretaries, you don't belong to the union. You're going to lose your pension. Is that fair? Is that what we stand for as Americans? Is that fair? And I am answering the question. By dividing people along those lines, that is one of the most unfair acts I've ever heard that our federal government has ever done. Stripping middle-class, hard-working retirees of their pensions. How can you look eye to eye? Can you imagine? I mean, I've looked eye to eye with these folks up and down I-75. So many of them live in the Dayton area, live in Youngstown. I've sat with these folks who were stripped of their pensions from the federal government. I get passionate here because my grandfather was a member of the UAW. My grandfather was a member of the UAW. My grandmother was a member of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. My mother went to community college. I come from the same roots you come from. Assuming you come from those roots. And I'll tell you what, it is unfair to split people down those lines and say, if you belong to a union, you can keep your pension. But if you don't belong to a union, you're going to lose your pension. Because that is not what we stand for in this country. It's not the right thing to do. And Senator Brown should be ashamed of supporting a process that stripped thousands of Ohioans of their pensions. Think about the mechanics. We have mechanics who are working at dealerships throughout here in West Central Ohio, throughout the state of Ohio. These mechanics, hardworking blue-collar men and women who are fixing cars, getting their hands dirty. These aren't millionaires. These aren't executives. These are hardworking blue-collar folks. lost their jobs because one day the federal government said, sorry, your dealership is closed. Is that fair? I mean, is that how we should be treating these mechanics? And I just get fired up about these retirees who lost their pension.
Based on this.
No, I mean, this is exactly the topic. I think your question's off base.
I'm not going to debate this. I just want to know why you would oppose a loan to the Chrysler and Ford that this direct area has benefited. $25 million has came back to this because of this, and they're paying this money back. You say they aren't, but they are. And it's not reflective of the stock price. That's up and down. That's just like the price of oil, that the speculators that control that. But we have 850,000 jobs tied to the auto industry in the state of Ohio. I'm the president of the
You know that number's ridiculous. You know that number's ridiculous.
It's not ridiculous.
That 850,000 number is from some made-up organization in Michigan that says if there's a lady working at a diner 5 miles from our
Josh, I'm president of the building trades here.
I've got friends who are involved in the building trades.
Listen to me.
Your question's dead wrong. The premise of it is dead
Jim,
wrong.
all I want to state here, we have 200 members, 200 local community people here that are working out this Ford plan, bringing in $25 million to this area in wages and benefits that it's going to spend in this area.
Ford didn't advocate to receive anything. Yours did. I mean, the facts of your question are, I can't answer a question when the facts are wrong. And I would challenge you to travel to the Dayton area, to the Youngstown area, and you look these men and women in the eye, 65-year-old women who lost their, men and women who lost their retirements, you look them in the eye and tell them that was fair.
Joshua, let's move on to the next question.
Morning. Yeah, I think I mentioned at the beginning that I have a real estate brokerage here in town, and provided me the opportunity to have a front row seat on the economic collapse and meltdown. So my question is about the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And I guess, do you own a home?
I do.
And you financed that?
We have mortgages.
You have mortgages. And you were able to make your way through that process that wasn't overly complicated?
Correct.
Because the proposition, when you buy a house and you finance it with mortgages, is fairly straightforward. That somebody's going to give you money and you're going to pay it back, and you get to occupy the house and live in it. And that while it's tragic and there are many hardship stories of people who've lost houses or foreclosure during this economic downturn, they did receive shelter during that time. And the people who really lost money were the banks. And I guess the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau seems to me to be a solution that's in search of a problem. That the mortgage process can be reformed, certainly, but that wasn't the real problem. And Ben Bernanke has been addressing as kind of a voice in the wilderness the real problem, which was providing liquidity to a market for mortgage-backed securities. So I didn't know what comments you might have on that entire.
Right. So deeply familiar with the CFPB. In fact, my predecessor, two before me, Rich Cordray, is now the leader there. Correct. I think you described it very well. A solution in search of a problem. And unfortunately, that is endemic in Washington. You think about so many agencies and bureaucracies and departments who are not called for in our Constitution that have come about as solutions in search of problems. Not all of them, but many of them. And listen, this is, at the end of the day, it's going to be an added cost for middle class Ohioans, it's going to be an added cost for middle class Americans. Because whenever you add bureaucracy and red tape, it just gets passed on to the consumer. We all know that. I mean, let's be honest, it gets passed on to the consumer. And those folks who advocate for more layers of bureaucracy, what they're advocating for is for companies to have to hire more accounting firms and to hire more law firms and compliance workers to deal with this stuff instead of putting product out the door. And whether you're talking about regulations like this or other regulations that come out of the EPA or other agencies, the more red tape requires more hiring of professional services firms. And when you hire more professional services firms to pay accounting fees, legal fees, compliance fees, that cost gets passed on to the consumer. And that's exactly what's going to happen. When the rubber hits the road, it's going to hurt middle class Ohioans. It's going to be an added cost on them. And that's why I not only respectfully disagree with the creation of this bureau, but in general, believe we need a moratorium on new regulations in Washington. We really need to look at our entire regulatory environment, our EPA, our FDA, every regulatory body in Washington, and ask the question, how are these serving the people? That's unfortunately the problem with this agency, is that at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a net negative for the people of our state.
Well, and the second part then too about the Fed and Fed Bernanke. Could you envision a reform of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to institutionalize some of the measures that the Federal Reserve has been implementing to provide stability and certainty to the secondary market mortgages?
Right. Can you restate the question?
Can you envision reform to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
Yes.
That would incorporate institutionalizing the stability of the mortgage-backed securities market?
Absolutely. I mean, Fannie and Freddie were inward. Absolutely needs to be deeper.
Look, we have about 50 employees. Our three biggest expenses are payroll, taxes, number two, and health insurance. The health insurance issue has been hit too quite a bit, and I just want to get a little bit more on it. We know it's terrible. We pay $1 zillion our own stuff for our own people. We all have $10,000 deductibles we got to work with. But we also provide it, we sell it. It's about 23% of our revenues, and what we do out in the community, we're selling the health insurance benefits. Taxes are a huge issue, and going forward, I'm pretty clear on your statement, which I applaud you for. I think it's where that goes. The Affordable Care Act. What do you see if the right makeup comes through Congress and through the Senate? Repeal, tweak it. What can we look for? We're scared to death.
Repeal. You should be scared to death of it. Any small business owner, any job creator, any blue-collar worker, any pipe fitter should be scared to death of it. Anyone in this country who's considering himself in the middle class or the poor or middle-class Americans should be scared of this legislation. It will be a job killer for the middle class. It creates incredible uncertainty in the marketplace, and that's the promise here question. Let's put on the table one of the major problems we have in this country right now: the amount of pent-up capital on the sidelines. A combination of this legislation, the healthcare legislation, with overregulation in Washington, with the complicated nature of our tax code, with uncertainty in the European markets, all of that put into a package has created incredible pent-up capital in this country. There's a lot of capital sitting on the sideline that can be used for new job creation, that can be used for investment into capital, to new technology, new machinery, and hiring more people. But it's just sitting on the sidelines. And that healthcare legislation is right in the center of that, of the cause of that pent-up capital, and the cause of that uncertainty in the marketplace. And yes, we do need to repeal it. It's not all bad. I think there's wisdom in allowing kids to stay on their parents' insurance until they're age 26. I think there's wisdom. It makes sense to allow for coverage of pre-existing conditions. But by and large, I believe that the legislation was severely misguided. It was largely unfunded, which we found out because they're taking $700 billion from Medicare to finance it. And at the end of the day, as we all know with most of these new government programs, the bill is a lot more than what it was advertising. What it would be on the road is a lot more expensive. Here's what I think it was. I think it was an end around the government on healthcare. And Sherrod Brown, to his credit, he stood up to the president on his healthcare legislation. The only problem was when he stood up to him, he said, "President Obama, I don't like this. It doesn't go far enough." He was one of the few politicians in Washington who said that they should have gone farther. He was advocating for a complete public option and complete government-run healthcare, essentially. We should be going in another direction. We should be going in a direction where patients and doctors make decisions, not government bureaucrats. We should be going in a direction where we empower the growth in health savings accounts. Next door in Indiana, Mitch Daniels, to his credit, did a pilot program for his government employees for health savings accounts. And they liked it. 10 million Americans on health savings accounts. This is the way of the future in large part. We should be doing everything we can to empower healthcare decision-making in the private sector and eliminate it in the government sector.
So, Josh, is that repeal and just total get rid of the whole thing? Or what are you gonna replace it with? Is it just kick the whole thing out?
I don't want to be repetitive, but I'll repeat what I said a little earlier. So here are some things I'm for. And to your question, I think it's a good question, because I actually think the Republican Party has sometimes been at fault for...
Yeah, this has been going on for 50 years
now. For just being against, and we need to be for something too. So let me tell you what I am for. I'm for empowering the growth in health savings accounts. I'm for common sense tort reform to bring down the cost for your union members and for citizens throughout the state. I'm for allowing for purchase and sale of insurance across the state lines to bring down the cost of health insurance. I'm also for competition in the marketplace when it comes to physician-owned practices. Think about all of us around this room. Think about the doctors you know in your life who maybe 30, 20, 10 years ago had their own practice, who are now working for a larger healthcare system. We all can tell that story, all right? All of us can tell that story. We are blessed to have healthcare systems like yours here in our county, like the Cleveland Clinic, James Cancer Hospital, Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati, and others. At the same time, we want physician-owned practices. We should want physician-owned cancer centers and radiological centers and whatnot, because that competition in the marketplace makes the bigger institutions better. That competition works. It makes all ships rise. And that's something I believe we need to be for. And unfortunately, the federal government has specifically targeted physician-owned hospitals, and they're trying to put them out of business. And it's the opposite direction we should be going.
Judy.
Okay. Josh, you've talked a lot about oil and gas exploration and the importance of coal, but you've also talked about uncertainty and how that hurts everybody. What's your opinion on the ethanol mandates and other renewable energy initiatives, and then the lack of a passage of a new farm bill, and the fact that the vast majority of the funding for the farm bill goes to food stamps, not to actually production agriculture?
Right. So let me start with the government picking winners and losers when it comes to energy. It's bad for blue-collar men and women because it increases the cost of manufacturing, which means it'll decrease the opportunity to hire more blue-collar. It's bad for consumers who are purchasing electricity to power their homes or gas and their cars. The government picking winners and losers when it comes to energy is a bad thing. The poster child there is Solyndra. $500 million of our tax money down the drain. They never had a good business plan. If the business plan was that good, someone in the private sector would have invested in it. They didn't have a good business plan. $500 million down the drain. The company ends up getting raided by the feds and is now bankrupt. That's the poster child, but you know what? There's a lot of other Solyndras out there that haven't gotten the amount of publicity that Solyndra has. The energy czar in Washington, the Department of the Energy and the Obama administration, has been one that thinks it can choose who are going to be the winners and losers in the marketplace, and we end up with Solyndras. You mentioned ethanol. You go across the spectrum. I don't think the federal government should be picking winners and losers. They shouldn't be picking oil and gas as winners and losers, and they shouldn't be picking wind, solar, and wave energy as picking winners and losers. All of us around this room, as consumers, those of us who are gassing up our cars, those of us who are turning on the lights in our house, those of us who are running manufacturing companies, that's who should be choosing what type of energy they want to purchase. It works. That market works. And it's important we apply free market principles to energy. And this is one of those areas where Sherrod Brown and I just respectfully and forcefully disagree. Also, think about the tradition of family farming we have in West Central Ohio, up and down I-75 and throughout the state. You know what it's done to the cost of feed for animals. I mean, if you're an animal farmer, this government taking winners and losers and subsidizing certain components of the energy industry, it's been a big problem for animal farmers. You think about the combination of the added cost in feed with the death tax. It's a pretty bad combination. I'm going to be with a bunch of farmers. It's actually, why I need to leave here. I'm going to be with a bunch of farmers at noon today, talking about this, talking about how we can bring down the cost of feed through the free market, and how we can eliminate the death tax. And the government getting into the industry, or getting into the business of picking winners and losers in the energy industry, is bad for farmers, bad for us as consumers, bad for middle class pipe fitters who are going to the grocery store to buy goods. It's bad for men and women who, senior citizens who are going to go to the grocery store to buy goods, and it's bad all around. Secondly, in respect, what was the second part of the question?
Just kind of the fiscal cliff.
Right, fiscal
Farm bill not being passed, the
yeah, I mean, it's
food stamps being the majority of that funding,
Yeah.
those kind of.
Listen, there's this terminology that was taught to me by, when I was in the legislature, and they were referencing Washington. They talk about in Washington, oftentimes good pieces of legislation end up being what they call quote unquote Christmas tree bills, where all these different politicians in Washington, Democrats and Republicans, guilty of it, hang legislative ornaments off of different pieces of legislation. If you're going to have a piece of legislation that deals with agriculture in this country, have it deal with agriculture. And if you want a piece of legislation that's going to deal with food stamps, then have a different piece of legislation that deals with food stamps. But unfortunately, they're combining two pieces of legislation that are relatively unrelated. And it's one of the main reasons why they're having trouble passing it in Washington.
When you look at campaign finances, do you feel like there's any need for any type of reforms, especially with the growth of the super PACs ever since the Supreme Court decisions?
Right. It's a good question. When I think of that issue, I always think of transparency as a good thing. So I'm a supporter of transparency. I also think it's important that we as community leaders, as business leaders, as media leaders, what have you, advocate for civility in the discourse. I'll tell you one story from this campaign. The AFL-CIO ran an ad attacking my wife for quote-unquote betting against America. Let me tell you about my wife. My wife's an independent voter. She's not a Republican. My wife's a social worker by trade. She's not really interested in politics. She deals with students on a day-to-day basis in her work. The AFL-CIO ran an ad that she was quote-unquote betting against America because of a small investment she had that she doesn't even control. This is a woman who waited at home for over 7 months when I was in Iraq on my second tour, who prayed that I would come home safely, who cried herself to bed at night, who when I came home was married under the swords of the United States Marines. And the AFL-CIO attacked my wife for quote-unquote betting against America. To their credit, the Cleveland Plain Dealer called this ad a lie and called it out as false. And so we went to Senator Brown and said, Senator, this is the lowest this campaign has gone. Would you mind denouncing this ad? It's not even your ad, it's an ad from another group. Let's get off your back. Will you denounce this ad? He refused. I gave him another opportunity. We were at a table like this together, the Columbus Dispatch. I said, Senator Brown, I'm giving you another shot. Would you denounce that ad? No skin off your back, not even your ad, the AFL-CIO's. He refused. And I think that's one of the major problems right now is just the lack of civility in our politics. Please. Sir, Jim.
You started off talking about.
I should say I've gotten to know Heather a lot over the past many years. She will attest that disproportionate to the population of Lima, I've spent a ton of time here to the point where the TV stations and the newspaper, when we'd come, like, we don't want to cover you anymore. You've been here enough. So I pretty much camped out in the Lima area. So I've gotten to know Heather very well, and I think you're a fair reporter.
Sure.
Fair and tough.
Well, I wanted to ask you about something you said at the beginning about working across the aisle. You and I have talked about this before. Is there a piece of legislation that you can point to that has had your name on it with a Democrat and let me ask this differently this time, that you've actually gotten passed?
I appreciate that. When I was on the House Insurance Committee, I'm going to talk about City Council and State Representative. That's okay with you. When I was in the House Insurance Committee, I was involved with the reconstruction of oversight to our workers' comp investment fund. Many of you remember thinking back to 2005, 2006, the coin scandal and all the unfortunate occurrences in our BWC investment fund. So I worked in the majority in a bipartisan way. We didn't have to work in a bipartisan way, but we chose to in a bipartisan way on the House Insurance Committee to pass reconstruction of the oversight to the BWC Investment Fund, which we believe placed better controls on the BWC Investment Fund to ensure that what happened in the earlier part of last decade would not happen again. I was also proud as a city councilman to lead the charge on the first ever property tax rollback in the history of my county. I worked on it with a lot of senior citizens actually. When I was knocking on doors running for Winter City Council, what I kept hearing, I'm from a bedroom community where I lived when I was a city councilman, about 16,000 people called Windhurst, Ohio. Not hardly any industry there, it's mostly just bedroom community, a lot of senior citizens, more Democrat than Republican, and just regulars, mostly in middle class type area. What I kept hearing time and time again from senior citizens was, Josh, I paid off my mortgage, I've raised my kids here, I've lived in my house for 30 years, 40 years, but I can't afford to stay here because of property taxes. And so when I got elected, I said, I'm going to do something about this. And I worked with Democrats, Republicans, and independents throughout my community. And we put together a plan to actually lower property taxes. And this plan passed 6-1 in bipartisan support. We had Democrats and Republicans. And frankly, at the beginning, there wasn't a lot of support there from other councilmen. But through educating them, through them hearing from the citizens throughout the community, through my doing my homework and showing them the economics that we can keep a strong balance sheet for our community, but also lower property taxes, we ended up passing the first municipal property tax rollback in the history of Cuyahoga County. To our knowledge, it's one of the only municipal property tax rollbacks in the history of the state of Ohio. Now let me contrast that. In 2006, when then Congressman Sherrod Brown was running against Mike DeWine at the Cleveland City Club, they were having a debate, and Sherrod Brown attacked Mike DeWine. Said Senator DeWine, you failed us because you voted with President Bush about 95% of the time. And he attacked Mike DeWine on voting with President Bush 95% of the time. Anyone know what Sherrod Brown's voting record is with President Obama? 95%. If that's not the peak of hypocrisy, I don't know what is. Jim.
When we first made the statement, we talked about working with party lines, across party lines, bipartisan, different. When I saw this question asked over here, I could see a wall come up, and I think that's been the problem. You know, it's the way we respond to each other and the harshness of the B's and the R's toward each other, the polarization of the voters.
Don't mistake passion for harshness. I have a lot of respect for what he does. As I mentioned, I'm
Jim, we're good here.
Don't respect passion. He's passionate. We passionately disagree, but I tell you what, I got a heck of a lot of respect for him. You know, I know what he does on a day-to-day basis. It's a difficult job, and I have a lot of respect for him. And you know, as I mentioned, I have a lot of Democrats in my family as well. So don't mistake passion for harshness, because I do have a lot of respect for what he does on a day-to-day basis.
You mentioned the middle class. Who is the middle class?
Let me talk about my family. Let me talk about my family. My grandfather was liberated from Nazi camps by Allied troops. He lost his entire family. He walked out of the camps and he made his way to Italy. He didn't speak Italian. He met my grandmother, Fernanda, and they lived there for about 4 or 5 years. And they decided that they were going to move to either Brazil or Argentina. One of his buddies visited one of those countries in South America, and he came back and said, "Joe, it's hot like hell there. You don't want to go to South America." So they went to Rome and switched their papers to America. And they came to Cleveland around Christmas Day, 1949. Neither of them spoke a lick of English. My grandfather was a member of the UAW union, got a job at a grass factory making plumbing supplies and made pipes and other plumbing supplies at a grass factory. Worked there for over 30 years. My grandmother was a member of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. She worked as a clerk at a drugstore for over 25 years. My mother, none of my grandparents had a college degree. My other grandfather served in the U.S. Army Air Corps in the Cleveland area. My mother does not have a 4-year college degree. She went to community college. She got a 2-year degree in early childhood education from Cuyahoga County Community College and worked in the public schools for over 20 years. Her son got a college degree from Ohio State. He was so inspired by his family, he decided to join the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine, and he got a law degree from Case Western Reserve. All of you can tell that same story in your families. I'm sure all of you have your own families. But that's how America's supposed to work. Think about that. These immigrants come over, don't speak a lick of English, get a job making pipes at a plumbing factory. One of them's a clerk at a drugstore. Their daughter then goes to community college, gets a 2-year degree at community college, works in the public schools. Her son, goes to Ohio State and goes to Case Law School and joins the Marine Corps to try to give back to his country. And my sister, she's a social worker. She's a social worker. She works in the public schools, working with troubled kids in the public schools. That's how America should work. And I believe my family is the story of so many other American families. How you can come here with the clothes on your back that came here from Italy. And next generation makes it a little better. Next generation makes it a little better. It's because they appreciated education, they appreciated hard work and sweat and getting your fingernails dirty, and they appreciated the strength of the middle class. Listen, it's one of the reasons I was able to get elected in a Democratic area, not once but twice. It's one of the reasons why, or 3 times really, city council, state rep. It's one of the reasons why when I ran for state treasurer, I wasn't just elected. I was elected as the top vote getter in the entire state of any of the statewide executive candidates, because I have a lot of Democrats who support me in addition to Republicans and independents. And I think we need more of that. We need more folks, more leaders like myself who can actually attract support across the political spectrum and understand, who have the life perspective that I do have, and can who get it and understand it. And I think my family story, that progression, is the story of the middle class. And listen, I don't want to say that my family's any different than any of your others. I'm sure every one of you can tell a similar story from your families, and that's the beauty of America. I was inspired by a speech that Marco Rubio gave at the convention. He talked about his father. I'm not sure if any of you saw this, but he talked about his father, who was a bartender when he was growing up, and he was an immigrant as well. He talked about his father would stand behind the bar at the back of the room, in the hotel, hotel ballroom, during events and whatnot, and look up at some guy giving a speech behind a podium, hoping and praying that one day his son could be the guy behind the podium. And he is. And think about it. And that's what's great about America. That doesn't have to be dealt with in a Democratic or Republican way. In fact, there's nothing Democrat or Republican about it. It's American. And it's one of the beauties of this country. And I think that's one place where Sheriff Brown and I strongly agree. That our focus should be on strengthening the middle class and giving opportunity to folks to go from poverty to middle class to beyond. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a strong and passionate supporter of school choice. I think you guys are in a lot of ways blessed to have Matt Huffman as a leader here from this area, because he's been such an advocate for common sense school choice. But I'll tell you about school choice from a different perspective. I've met a lot of single black moms in inner city Cleveland, Akron, and other parts of the state of Ohio, who for academic reasons, safety reasons, discipline reasons, and other reasons want a choice of where their kids go to school. We're living in poverty in inner cities and say, you know what? I want my kids to have an opportunity. I want my kids to wear a uniform when they go to school. I want them to have discipline. I visited this school.
About 3-4
Okay.
minutes.
I visited this school called St. Martin de Porres. I was inspired. This is a school. It's obviously by the name, it's a Catholic school. Most of the kids being educated there are black, and there are some Hispanic as well. Let me tell you about the concept of this school. We'll talk about the middle class. The concept of the school is 4 days a week, the kids go to school. 1 day a week, the kids go to work. So they have these businesses in the area that sponsor kids. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're going to school. And when they go to school, they're wearing business type attire. Every day they're going as if they're going to work. They're wearing ties, they're wearing suits, they're wearing business type attire. 4 days of work. 1 day, 4 days of school. 1 day, they go to work, at Sherwin-Williams or Eaton Corporation, whatever, and they're making copies, they're answering phones, and they're learning how to work in the business setting. But one of the key concepts of this, they say to the parents, your kids aren't going to go here for free. You're going to have skin in the game. And they say to these parents, I think it was around $400 or so they make the parents pay. So it's not financially impossible, but They feel that. I mean, there are folks who don't have a lot of money, $400, they feel that. And so the parents have skin in the game, the kids appreciate it, it's increased discipline, better education, they're getting real life work experience. And I tell you what, these kids graduate high school, they're gonna get jobs, they're gonna go to college. And we need opportunities like that to lift up the middle class. And I think that that issue of school choice is one of those issues where Democrats, Republicans, and independents can work together. And I applaud all the Democrats throughout Ohio and America who've had the guts. There's a lady named Nina Turner, who's a Democratic state senator, who's been a leader on this, and I applaud her. And I think that's one of those issues we can really work together to strengthen the middle class. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to have a strong middle class in America, we have to have strong education in America. Education is the tools and the tool belt to lift people from lower socioeconomic rungs to the middle class and from the middle class beyond.
Yeah, last but not least, you made your position on the Affordable Health Care Act very clear.
Yes.
So let's fast forward to 2001. President Obama was reelected. Senate retained its majority. So Josh Mandel was the new senator for the state of Ohio. What direction do you take on
Sure. So first thing is we repealed the legislation.
how are you going to do that with Democratic Senate and Republican?
Well, with the Democratic Senate, it'll be impossible to do that.
Okay, so where do you go?
So with the Democratic Senate, it's impossible to do that. I will advocate for a lot of the items that I've advocated for here today. I will advocate for expanded opportunity and access to health savings accounts. There are 10 million Americans currently in health savings accounts. I actually spoke, that was Lima Chamber of Commerce, wasn't it, where I spoke about interest? Yeah, it was Lima Chamber of Commerce. I spoke on this, or Allen County, I spoke on this topic a few months back. When you talk to small business owners, I venture to guess your clients who are small business owners and others around here, they want that expanded access to health savings accounts. Unfortunately, the federal government is working to restrict access to health savings accounts. So that's one priority of mine. Secondly, I'll advocate for common sense tort reform. In order to bring down the costs for your hospital, in order to ensure that doctors are having the freedom to rely on their training and instincts rather than being scared to practice medicine, we need to have common sense tort reform. We need to eliminate junk lawsuits in this country. Unfortunately, junk lawsuits have become industry in a lot of ways, and that's a bad thing for our nation. And I say that, in my family, we have folks who are plaintiffs' attorneys and defense attorneys. And so I say that understanding both sides of the issue. And again, I do think if someone's wronged on the opposite table, what have you, they should be able to pursue financial justice and be made whole. But at the same time, there should not be a junk lawsuit industry in this country because it artificially increased the costs of healthcare. Third, we need to provide opportunities for sale and purchase of insurance across state lines. It is illogical to stand up these artificial barriers at the borders of every state when it comes to health insurance. And I believe by allowing a sale of health insurance across state lines, we as consumers will be able to shop all over the place. And folks from other states will be able to come in here and frequent insurance here in the state of Ohio. That's a good thing. And I am confident that the insurance providers, carriers, agents here in the state of Ohio will benefit from that. And definitely the consumers here in the state of Ohio, the citizens of our state, will benefit from it, and it'll bring down the cost of health insurance in our country. We need to do everything we can also to get government out of the way when it comes to medical device, research, development, and manufacturing. Unfortunately, as the stories I've heard from companies like Steris in the state of Ohio, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers of sterilization equipment, Invacare in Elyria, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers of wheelchairs and home care equipment, Cardinal Health in Columbus, which is a Fortune 100 company. These are companies that are not asking for handouts from the government. They're saying to the government, just get out of the way. Just get out of the way. And we'll provide these products at an affordable rate to hospital systems, to family-run physician offices. And if we do it in an affordable way, the cost of MRIs for us as patients, the cost of cancer screenings, the cost of other important services that we go to in our healthcare will be lower. And so those are a lot of the things I will advocate for. Even if that legislation stays on the books for the Democratic Senate, I'll advocate for expanding access to health savings accounts, common sense tort reform. I'll advocate in every way I can for expanded opportunities for citizens to purchase health insurance throughout the country. So those are some ideas, and to your question, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think even if the legislation stays in the books, we can still advocate for those common sense reforms to healthcare. I have, while I am a Republican, I'm an American first, and I'm very independent-minded, and on some issues I see myself as a libertarian. And I think it's important that we do everything we can to limit the size and scope of government, to ensure that the government is not intruding on the daily lives of businesses and families throughout the state of Ohio and throughout the country. And unfortunately, the problem that's developed in Washington is that you have proper politicians, career politicians, who think that government is the answer to everything, especially the federal government. In my mind, the federal government is not the default answer to everything. In my mind, Washington is the problem. And as a United States Senator, I'll do everything I can to get Washington out of the way, to limit overregulation, to end overregulation, to limit taxation, and to ensure that families and businesses can keep more of their hard-earned dollars to create jobs and drive the economy. I deleted the www from my website, and I made my website jobs.joshmandel.com, because I think the top 3 issues that leaders throughout the state of Ohio, at the city council level, state level, and federal level, should be focused on. 3 issues: jobs, jobs, and jobs. And as United States Senator, I'll do that in a bipartisan way, and do it in a way that hopefully benefits County County. Listen, I hope to earn your support. I'm obviously here fighting for your support, and I'd be honored to have your support. If Sherrod Brown had a good story to tell of his past 6 years in Washington, he'd be telling it on TV right now. 80% of the TV ads Sherrod Brown has run are negative. About 80% of the TV ads we run are positive. The question for Sherrod Brown, not just for your editorial, but for everyone throughout the state is, for a guy who's been running for political office for 38 years, who's been in Washington for 2 decades, don't you at least have a few good things to say about your own record? And he's already answered that question. He doesn't. And because of that, I believe I deserve a chance to represent the state of Ohio here as your United States Senator. And if you don't like what I do over the next 6 years, endorse someone else in 6 years. And as voters, you can fire me in 6 years. But I think I deserve a shot, and I'd be honored to have your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.